Okay, today's presenters are some of our very own local South Florida extension agents. We got Kara Krueger, who's from Palm Beach County, and Yvette Goodiel from Martin County. And they're very passionate about native plants and Florida-friendly landscaping. And I just want to go ahead and pass it off to them, and I'll share these results on here as well.
Thank you, John. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, so my name is Kara Krueger. I am the Environmental Horticulture Extension Agent here in Palm Beach County. I'm one of John's colleagues. And Yvette Goodiel and I are going to talk to you today about native shrubs and small trees, specifically for tight spaces in the South Florida landscape. So today's webinar, our objectives are going to be to learn more about the value of native plants in the urban landscape, where to find natives for your landscape that you manage or install. I saw on the poll that some of the issue is not only demand but also some supply and cultivation. And then we're also going to apply, hopefully at the end of this, you'll be able to apply what you've learned by sharing the value of native plants with clients and incorporate more native plants into the landscapes that you manage and install. It's really important that we understand why these native plants are needed in our landscapes, and that some of our landscapes that we are managing and installing for may not have the space for some of the large material that are often found or utilized in larger spaces, and sometimes inappropriately at that. Okay. So Yvette.
Thank you, Kara. My name's Yvette Goodiel. I'm the commercial horticulture and sustainability agent in Martin County. And so I'm going to talk about some of the reasons that we would do this. So go ahead, Kara, please. So yeah, so the first question is, does it really matter? And from the poll questions, it sounds like you're all here because you value and see value in it and see that it does matter. But I hope through what we talk about today, you'll be that much better kind of armed with persuasion and information to share with your clients. And one of the reasons that it matters is that, our birds, our wildlife need food and shelter. We're an important stopping point before and after large water crossing, being here in Florida on this peninsula for our migrating birds. And so, they're coming here, especially in needing of restoring after a long voyage or preparing for a long voyage. And our resident birds as well need the food and shelter that we can provide. And, this is all more and more important because about a third of all American bird species are in decline. And this is according to a 2025 State of the Birds report that the Audubon Society developed. They said that about 42 species nationwide are considered to be at a tipping point for conservation. That means they have a really low population, and that smaller populations makes their future uncertain. They could be more readily wiped out by a major hurricane or wildfire or things like that. So we want to keep those populations thriving and robust. And, this is a landscape I photographed down in Palm Beach County. And you can see here how these look like gumbo limbos here are providing some, food and shelter for, birds passing by. And then they're also a benefit to us. I'd much rather walk down this street than a street without that native canopy there. So next, please. All right. And, I mentioned it's, becoming more and more of a need. And, we're talking today about planting in tight spaces, meaning often urban areas, and more of our state is becoming, developed with urban development. And these are a couple of maps that the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission developed, just looking at, current trends and how they're going as far as um, land being converted to urban. And as we see this more and more habitat loss of natural habitat, loss of agricultural lands, both of which our wildlife depend on, we're going to expect, more and more of these human wildlife conflicts, more and more isolation and degradation of the existing natural habitats that we have. And, I'll be pretty old by 2060, but if I'm even alive then. But we can all think about what we would want to live in as the future progresses and more of our state turns orange like this. What do we want to see when we're, driving down the street to run an errand, or sitting outside in our yard, or things like that. What do we want to see? And then we, in our own roles, whether we're a consumer buying plants or a professional creating landscapes, we get to choose what we create for the future. So go ahead, please. And this is another couple of figures from the State of the Birds report. And this I pulled out because we're talking about planting trees. So this is a look at the eastern forest birds. And they said that the obligate eastern forest birds, breeding birds, have lost more than a quarter of their population since 1970. So those birds are in decline. And it's especially an issue with the forest birds that are dependent on disturbance, that need actually kind of this regenerating forest. They don't want a closed canopy, mature forest. And so to me, that's somewhat similar to what we might be able to provide in our urban areas, is a canopy with some grassy areas, a canopy with some open areas. Um, so you can see here that, the numbers, the size of the dot is larger, is more species, lower is fewer species with the smaller dots. Florida generally has pretty small dots, unfortunately, and a lot of them, especially for those disturbance dependent species, are red, meaning those populations are in decline. And so again, what we do in our urban areas, which are covering more and more of our state, can help. It's not enough. I don't think any of us here to, let, our fragmented state parks and county parks support all the wildlife. We can support some of it too. So go ahead, please. All right, and so I wanted to highlight just a couple of those eastern forest birds that are in decline to kind of put a face to what we're talking about in a way. So this is one of them, the eastern towhee. These occur throughout the state of Florida. They're here year round. Cute, adorable little bird, and they're one of those conservation tipping point species where they're considered an orange alert, which means they've lost more than half of their population in the past 50 years. And they're seeing an even steeper decline within the past 10 years. So it's just accelerating. And we can help. These birds, they can potentially live in our yards or at least visit our yards if we have this kind of shrubby habitat that they need for shelter. And just to give like a picture of them, if you haven't seen them or experienced their habits, is, the way they describe it, Audubon, is that, you'll hear them kind of rummaging around in the shrubby undergrowth, and it'll sound like this large creature. And, if you look to see, you'll find, oh, it's just this little bird rummaging around for food in the shrubby undergrowth there. And then you might hear their sound, which is like a chewing sound. Um, and if you look close, you might see those white tail feathers. They might kind of flash and just catch a glimpse of it. But usually, because it likes those dense shrubby areas for cover, you're not going to see this bird very commonly. So, but look close and you might. And in addition to shelter, they also need food. Hopefully, I'm not going too long, but I just wanted to point this out because, of course, they're eating things like insects that we would try to, otherwise eliminate or reduce the populations of in our landscape. And so, anytime you see talks about landscaping for wildlife, um, the minimizing the use of pesticides is an important part of it. And then the last part here is to point out that they're also feeding on the seeds of like grasses and weeds that we would typically tend to mow down or maybe herbicide out. So to think on that of what approach you would take. I know I've seen some chatter online about, rewilding areas. And in my own yard, I've tried just blocking out small areas to let things grow for a while until my husband starts protesting too much. And then maybe I'll try another area. But it's just neat to think about that. It's okay to let some areas of our yard go if we're actually helping wildlife. So next, please. And this is the second species I wanted to talk about. It's the brown thrasher. I've seen this in our neighborhood, foraging for insects in grassy areas. When I've been on my walks, it's kind of scratching around in the ground to get some insects to eat. It'll also eat berries and acorns. And this is a picture of it. Looks like it's eating the fruit of, this looks like a Florida privet. So you might see it perched there eating, or if it's, breeding, the male will, make this vocalization to defend territory. And then it might approach a female and kind of sing softly. And the male or the female will bring small leaves and sticks to one another as part of their courtship. Um, and then they nest usually within, again, this dense cover. And they'll usually nest above the ground, maybe about 2 to 7 feet above the ground, but they, like the other bird, will also nest on the ground. Okay, so go ahead. And then the brown thrasher, this is data from the Christmas bird count. And so every year since about 1900, volunteers, citizen scientists across the Americas get together around Christmas time and conduct censuses of birds in the area, in the areas where they live often, or areas where they're visiting. And so you can see here the counts for the brown thrasher have been in significant decline over the years. But yet this is a species that can coexist with us if we give them the food and shelter that they need. Okay, and then, the benefits are many. In addition to habitat loss, the bird populations like ours, they're vulnerable to climate extremes. Too much heat can cause mortality of young birds in their nests. Heavy rainfall as well can flood the nests and make it more difficult for the parents to feed their young. And so planting trees, especially the native trees that our birds have evolved to rely upon and feed from, can provide habitat and can mitigate climate extremes. And then those trees are also capturing stormwater. So that is allowing the rainfalls to actually recharge our aquifer instead of causing the extent of flooding that we get. The trees can provide shade, lessening the costs of cooling our homes and decreasing the impacts of heat waves. And improving bird habitat in our yards and neighborhoods also has benefits to our mental health. And this is something again, in the State of Birds report, they pulled in research, a few research studies that looked at how we benefit from encounters with birds. Um, for example, one of them asked people to talk about their mental well-being after they saw or heard a bird. And there was a positive association from that, even in people with depression as well, but people across the board and including people with depression. Um, and another study, they looked at the amount of vegetative cover and the abundance of birds in an area, and they found that the the greater abundance of birds was associated with a lower prevalence of anxiety, stress, and depression. And then a third study looked at life satisfaction, how satisfied people said they were with their lives. And then they related that data to data that they had from other sources on species diversity of birds, mammals, and trees. And they found that, especially with the bird species richness, was associated with strong feelings of life satisfaction to the extent that it was comparable to what other data has shown would be the increases in life satisfaction that people would have from earning more money. So, it does contribute to our quality of life as well to have these trees, including native trees that support wildlife. So go ahead, please, Kara. And then consumer motivations. I wanted to highlight a couple of recent studies that some folks at the University of Florida have done. And they, we've talked about the benefits of all of this, but do residential clients know the benefits? And I saw in the poll, most of you, the number of you that said that the interest from clients was an obstacle to landscaping for wildlife was pretty low. So it seems like you are having those conversations, which is a good thing. And that's similar to what this study found, is that people were asked what would motivate them to have a wildlife friendly yard. And they said the way their yard looks. They said, being able to enjoy nature and feeling like they're doing the right thing. Those would be motivating factors for them. And some of the green industry folks they surveyed said, well, we're worried that our clients would say, no, we don't want to do this because we want a really manicured yard. We don't want a yard that looks bad. But when they surveyed the homeowners, they found that that was not a strong preference. They didn't have a strong preference for a manicured yard, or feel that their preference for a manicured yard would stop them from landscaping for wildlife. And so instead, the obstacles that the homeowners identified to landscaping for wildlife were perceived costs and what would their HOA think or penalize them for. And so so this is an area where there can be opportunity. The homeowners, according to the surveys, the homeowners may be more open to landscaping for wildlife than they are conveying to their landscape professionals. And they do have some worries about the costs and the HOA regulations, but they see personal value in landscaping for wildlife. Again, they want to enjoy nature. They want to feel like they're doing something good. And so you all, as green industry professionals, you're well positioned to educate your clients in the possibilities for wildlife friendly landscaping and the ways that that can fulfill the client desires while also not increasing costs, or not increasing costs unreasonably, and staying within the boundaries of the HOA. So that's it for that.
Thank you, Yvette. And so now I'm going to speak more towards the how do we make this happen for our landscapes. I'd like to kind of meet Yvette's talking about why it's important with this map from the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. It was originally drawn by UF botanist John Davis in 1967, but this kind of shows with broad strokes what our ecosystems are in Florida. And that is helpful in understanding the not only the plant species that were historically found in these areas, but also then the wildlife that you would find in these areas and how best to support that wildlife that we are, as shown by those earlier maps, that we are currently developing out of homes. So if we can use these types of ecosystem maps to make some of our plant selections, that can also be really helpful to support wildlife appropriately in our landscapes. So how do we select our native plants? Here are some resources that are really wonderful so that you can understand which native plants are right for your area. Please note that the hardiness zones, the USDA hardiness zones, have shifted a little bit. So you may have some more plants that are can be used. You might want to experiment a little bit depending upon where you are. But some of the things that we really love, the resources that we really love in order to educate ourselves and others on native plants, are the Institute for Regional Conservation. It is a Southeast Florida local conservation organization that has wonderful plant profiles using the Natives for Your Neighborhood section. The Florida Native Plant Society also has a wonderful plant database that they are currently updating, so it looks different than it used to. But we also really want to encourage everyone to connect with your local chapter because they might have more nuanced resources when it comes to how to find maybe some of those more rare plants and growers that might not be on any of these other platforms when we talk more about finding nurseries for your plant material. The Florida Wildflower Foundation has wonderful plant profiles. Going to local botanical gardens, here in Palm Beach County, Pan's Garden on Palm Beach Island, which is highly developed. It's an urban area, and right in the middle is a very small, nearly 100% native landscape botanical garden that's really wonderful to see. We also have here in Palm Beach County Mounts Botanical Garden. On the West Coast, there's Naples Botanical Garden that does a really lovely job, and up north a little bit farther you have Bach Tower. So there's lots of botanical gardens or gardens in general that you can go and see some native plants to understand what they're going to look like in the planted landscape and more of a maintained look than if you were out on a hike. And then also using the Florida Plant Atlas from University of South Florida. That's a really great way to kind of do some cross-referencing to where these plants, these native plants, may have been vouchered and are found naturally, but then also a great way to see more pictures, as some of these websites may not have a robust catalog of pictures. So to kind of use all of these resources to see what these plants might look like. But as a kind of hopeful, we are always looking for more pictures of these native plants in an installed, more traditional landscape setting, because it is hard for a lot of your clients to really understand what these plants are going to look like once they're installed. Then, of course, University of Florida IFAS, we have plant profiles throughout our website. So if you search a plant with UF IFAS after it, we will probably have information about it. And then sourcing these native plants, that can sometimes be one of the hardest parts. I do know that that sourcing and growing of some of the more obscure rare native plants is complicated. So we need to really access these networks. Traditional sources of plant ant and plant search can be very useful. Some of the larger nurseries that grow ornamentals as well, non-native ornamentals as well as our native plants, oftentimes have a really great access on those two sites, but then also using our Florida Association of Native Nurseries. And again, accessing your local native plant society who may have knowledge of local growers that are not on any of these platforms. So making those connections to see where there might be other options. And then there's some other resources for native plant sourcing. Like the University of Florida has one of the publications is recommended native landscape plants for Florida's Treasure Coast that has really wonderful resources for how to source some of these native plants. So using all of these as well as all of the different plant profiles to kind of understand which plants you want to be using in the landscape and may or may not be easier to find, but to try to incorporate more diversity in the landscape by using all of these sources to add native plants. So next we'll go into the featured native plants, and I think that Yvette starts us off.
Yvette, we're not able to hear you.
No. Yeah, I was thinking it was just me that I couldn't hear. Okay.
Hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know why the headphones stopped working, but there we go. Thank you. Thanks for telling me. All right. So I'm going to talk about Simpson Stopper, which I find to be a lovely tree. I hope you do too. You might have experience with it already. So it's an evergreen shrub or small tree, usually gets to about 10 to 20 foot tall here. It has a narrow canopy and kind of this upright growth. I'll show a picture of that next. And the bark is like I tried to get a close up of so you could see the peeling, kind of flaking, multicolored bark, which is nice. It grows in hardwood hammocks. And so it's shade tolerant, but it can also handle full sun. And it's moderately tolerant of drought, but it has a low salt or brackish water tolerance. So go ahead, please, Kara. And this is a photo of it. So think of this is an unpruned specimen of it. So think of it like your blank canvas, what you could do with this in the landscape. So some of the ways that this plant could be used, it could be pruned up a lot to show off the peeling bark along the trunk and the multiple branches in the canopy. You could also create a little more of a formal tall hedge with it. You could picture it planted, in the shade of a taller canopy tree, growing there, kind of mixed in as a sub-canopy species. See what else I thought of. It could be, or it could be left as it is and planted with other shrubs of varying heights, maybe some grasses and lower growing wildflowers around and beside it to make kind of more of a naturalistic privacy hedge. So it has a lot of possibilities and a lot to offer wildlife and pollinators. So go ahead, Kara, please. And these are a couple of photos up close of it, and you can see those dark green leaves. On mine, I noticed that the part of the shrub that gets a lot of sun, the leaves kind of curl in like this. And then on the other side of the shrub that's more in the shade, the leaves are not curled up like this, they're more wide open. But anyway, you can see the close-up here, these tiny little glandular dots that cover the leaf surface. And so those leaves emit an aroma when you crush them. And then the flowers are fragrant as well. I found varying accounts of when they flower. I should be more tuned into when mine flower, but generally it's said to be year-round or focused in winter, spring, some say spring, summer. The blooms are attractive to native bees and other pollinators. This is what is it? A dark flower scarab beetle that I found on the flower of one of my stopper, Simpson stopper. And I thought it was pretty cute and a neat discovery. I'd never seen this beetle before. It doesn't seem to be causing major damage, though it might be feeding on pollen, nectar, and or other parts of the flower, but it wasn't a problem. And then the red-orange berries are attractive to birds. And this is a threatened species in Florida. So having it in our landscapes increases the amount of it that we have here in our state. Okay, go ahead, please. And then the second species I wanted to talk about is Walter's viburnum. Also a hammock species that can tolerate some shade, but also do well in full sun. Another moderately drought tolerant species, again, growing as a shrub or small tree, about 10 to 20 foot tall in South Florida. And it can have more of a broad canopy compared to the Simpson stopper. I guess it just depends on the situation and what it's surrounded with. But the bark is dark and furrowed, and it is temperate semi-deciduous, so it might lose some or all of its leaves. And it gets the most notable thing for me with it, I like, we have some of this growing, one of these growing over our pond, and another place I lived, it was in a mixed border, kind of a natural border along the side of the yard. And in both places, I like the look of the leaves, and I love the flowers when they arrive, and they're just so beautiful. Thank you for pulling that up. Just this, kind of snowy blanket across the canopy of these beautiful white flowers, which are beneficial to native bees and other pollinators. So go ahead, please. And then also the fruits that are shown here, they're black when they're ripe, and those are provide food for birds. And go ahead. Okay, and so the last species I want to talk about is the cabbage palm, which is the state tree of Florida and South Carolina. It's pretty slow growing, can get quite tall. And I've been reading a book lately that I'm not sure if others have heard of. I'll show it on a next slide. But the author there, Jono Miller, or Jojo Miller, sorry, Jono Miller is talking about how longer lived the cabbage palms are than we previously thought. He's gone back in some of the historical records and looked, and he believes that cabbage palms may have a lifespan of a couple of centuries at times. And that, when you actually start to see the cabbage palm at the point where it's getting an above ground, trunk going, that it's actually been alive for at least a decade, if not longer than that, because they have such a long period of growing underground. And as a person who's tried to relocate a young cabbage palm, digging it up in the yard, which, is not a successful thing to do, but I didn't know that. And I tried, and just digging underground to find where the bottom is so you can stop digging and move it is just, there's so much underground that's developed by the time you're starting to see these little fronds growing out above ground portion. So that's neat to think of, just how long lived and how much they are growing before we even know it, the time underground to establish. They have a high drought tolerance, and they do well in full sun or light shade. And so I just think, it's well adapted to our Florida climate, long-lived, beneficial to wildlife, and narrow enough for our small yards. It's just a great native plant to include in more of our landscapes across the state. So go ahead, please. And just a couple of the features of the cabbage palm, looking at the trunk, you might find these leaf bases or boots, sometimes still attached, sometimes not. And Jono Miller's book, he spends, I think, 6 or 7 pages talking about why the boots might stay, why they might not, genetic reasons, manual removal. So, there's, I think the jury is still out on that. If anyone else knows, let me know. But so anyway, there's different looks that you might find with them, to have the boots or not have the boots. And then the fronds, go ahead one more, Kara, please. Here's the picture of the frond, and then they'll have, dark green, fan-shaped, and with these thread-like filaments that you can see here in this photo. And then this picture of the book, that's the book that I was talking about. If you're curious about the cabbage palmetto, want to learn a little more about it. But, the fronds, the trunk, the fibers of the cabbage palm have been utilized by humans over time and also by wildlife in Florida. And so they're kind of living reminders of our collective natural history. Go ahead. And then here are some close-up photos of the fruit and flowers. They get these abundant, creamy white, fragrant flowers that are beneficial for birds and butterflies and other pollinators, including the butterfly pictured here, which is the eastern pygmy blue butterfly. And this photo was taken in Monroe County, I think. And then those flowers develop into the fruits. There's a close-up of the fruits here, and those are a food for birds. So just great wildlife value and use in our landscape. Go ahead, Kara. I think it's your species next. Thank you.
Okay, and so continuing on with plant species that are great for our small spaces, Bahama strongbark. I think it's an underutilized tree. It's coastal rockland hammock species, so really southeast Florida. Very high drought tolerance once established. It is a small tree, about 15 to 25 feet, and has a really interesting weeping form that is not found in many of our other plant species. So it creates a different texture in the landscape when added. Along with that, as you can see from this picture, it has these really lovely, small, white, very bright white flowers that are lightly fragrant, that are wonderful for pollinators and will bloom all year off and on, but their peak is really summer through the fall. And it's wonderful for butterflies, bees, and hummingbirds do use this tree as well. And then you can see this really gorgeous, the drupes, the berries that are this bright orange, that will just then add weight to those cascading branches to add more texture and create that interesting form in the landscape. But they're very popular with birds and other animals. So adding this can not only add that textural and form difference to the landscape, but also really provide a lot for our wildlife. It is listed as endangered by the state of Florida. So it's something that it is available from native nurseries, but it does add something that's interesting then to the landscape with its shape. Keys blackbead, Florida Keys blackbead. I would love more pictures of this in full bloom. If anybody has it and is using it in the landscape, it is spectacular and smells incredible. It is a coastal hammock species as well. Very high drought tolerance once established. It's a large shrub to a small tree, about 8 to 15 feet tall. Again, it can be kept as a shrub and used kind of as an alternative hedge material if pruned that way. But it can also be limbed up to be a small tree. So think about those size of ligustrums that are used in the front of many houses, especially in HOAs and communities, that this can add something that's a little bit different. You don't want to prune it to prune off the flowering aspect of it, because that is absolutely spectacular. These little pink puffballs or white puffballs, depending upon where they're from. Some can be more white than pink, but it blooms predominantly winter to spring. Again, very fragrant, but it's also a host plant to three of our native butterflies, which is important to think about as well. So we talk about pollinators and providing for them, but we also want to make sure that we're providing host plants so that we can get the caterpillars, which serve many purposes, not only becoming butterflies, but are also a food source for some of our birds and other wildlife. So it is beneficial for pollinators from host plant as well as nectar and pollen. And the black seeds, you can kind of see in that kind of top left picture, the black seeds have this reddish pink aril that is great for birds. So it's very popular for all of our wildlife. This plant is also listed as threatened with the state of Florida. So it's something that it is readily available through nurseries, but it does create, it's a really lovely plant to add to the landscape, dark green, evergreen foliage that's kind of delicate, but also has these just spectacular blooming. I have a very small one that's in about a 1 gallon pot that's about to have some flowers this year for the first time, and I'm very excited about it. Cinnamon bark. I like to think of this as an opportunity to replace using Japanese blueberry in our landscape for many things. It's a coastal hammock species, but it has these really dark green leaves that can be used as a large shrub or a small tree. It is drought tolerant, not as drought tolerant as the first two plants that we talked about. But once established, it is quite drought tolerant, 15 to 20 feet tall, blooms on and off year round, but predominantly spring through the summer. The flowers are this kind of comb of really beautiful velvety red flowers that then will become these wonderfully velvety red fruit on the plant that is popular with pollinators for nectar plants, as well as the fruit being really popular with birds and mammals. One of the interesting things about this plant is that the flowers are synchronous, so they will open as female, and then the following day, those same flowers will transition to be male flowers so that they do get full pollination. So they get a high pollination rate. So it's pretty interesting to think about plants being able to evolve to accurately and fully pollinate themselves while not being a dioecious or a monoecious plant. It's also an important nectar plant for the Schaaf's butterfly, which is an imperiled butterfly in the Keys and Miami-Dade. And it is the plant itself, the cinnamon bark, is listed as endangered by the state of Florida. But again, it has these really beautiful dark green leaves that can be limbed up so you have more of a traditional tree shape, kind of think about hollies, but it can also be kept as a dense shrub to fill in and add as a buffer. So a lot of options with this plant. Again, if you want to start using it instead of the Japanese blueberry, this will provide more and have more interest in the landscape than that. To add to the stoppers, we have several stoppers here in Florida that are native. The redberry stopper, I wanted to add the redberry stopper and red stopper onto into this talk because they're less available, but they are also very interesting. Just how the Bahama strongbark adds some interesting texture and form to the landscape. These also have a little bit more of that weeping texture because of the leaf shapes. They have a little bit more of a drip to them. Think about like a Ficus benjamina. So this adds that interesting shape and texture to a landscape, while also having a traditional shrub or small tree if you limit up like you can with the Simpson stopper. Both of them have wonderfully fragrant white fluffy puff flowers and get great fruit that's great for pollinator or great for birds and wildlife. You can see the picture all the way on the right with the red stopper, how it can be a dense shrub. Same thing, it looks similar with the redberry stopper. Both of them bloom on and off year round, but with predominantly spring to summer. And they're both listed as endangered through the state of Florida. These might be a little bit more difficult to find through plant vendors, traditional plant vendors. So you might have to do a little bit more research and searching for somebody who's going to grow red berry and red stopper, but and they can also handle a little bit of shade, a little bit more shade than other plants because they are hammock species, but they're that kind of secondary shrub and small tree within the hammocks. And they're also slow growing. So you won't be doing too much pruning on them because they'll take a long time to get to the point where you're going to have to do any kind of maintenance. And we also wanted to just kind of present you with a short list. This is by no means an extensive list of plants that are great plants for small spaces. But thinking about things like Lignum vitae, which is a fabulous small blooming tree, very slow growing, thatch palm, slow growing, and more narrow palm, in a more narrow palm. Marlberry is great for shadier areas, and it's pretty columnar and upright. Wonderful, super fragrant flowers and berries that are great for wildlife. Jamaican caper, maidenbush, crab / oyster wood. These are just all really wonderful plants that can be utilized in the landscape to kind of substitute out some of those plants that are otherwise not really providing for wildlife and get great drought tolerance, as well as, depending upon where your landscapes are, can have some then salt tolerance that you wouldn't find from maybe some of the non-native ornamentals that you're utilizing in the landscape. So there are a lot of options out there to use native plants for our smaller, more confining landscapes. So then to wrap up, what are the next steps? How can you take this information and apply it to your landscapes? As Yvette alluded to, you all are the experts. Your customers are going to come to you. Your customers are your clients. They're going to come to you wanting answers and help to design their landscape and have those conversations because as we heard from Yvette, that your customers may not know how to communicate that they do want more wildlife, and they perceive that they need to have their landscape a certain way. And so you have the opportunity to educate your clients on why natives are important and that they can be used in urban and suburban landscapes. Recommend native plants to them, because if they don't know, then you can be the person to bring it to them, and then they're not just automatically going to grab for, let's say, Scheffelair or something, or an arboricola, that it's something that you're going to be able to bring interest and wildlife and pollinators to their landscape by recommending native plants. If also you think about native or landscapes that you have been maintaining for a long time, that perhaps those plants are starting to age out, and that's an opportunity for you to recommend the use of native plants in those areas. So like if a viburnum hedge is starting to age out or get shaded out or it becomes diseased, work in more native plants to incorporate some of these ideas. Because we do want more native plants, we want more diversity in our landscapes. It's really important for providing for wildlife and making sure that we have more sustainable ecosystems as that development at this point seems to be continuing to happen. We need to make sure that we're thinking about more than just can I trim this every single time that I'm at this landscape without it being detrimental to the plant. Let's make sure that we're thinking about the bees, the butterflies, the birds, the mammals, just general wildlife, and how is that landscape going to be used? And so I think if you want to talk about the survey then.
Sure. So I just put a link in the chat, or there's a QR code here for a follow-up survey to ask you, kind of what are your takeaways from today's talk, and that'll help us, document our outcomes and also see, what people are taking away, what we need to shift with future talks. So please take a moment to click the link or in the chat, or click the link on your cell phone through the QR code and take our survey. Let us know your takeaways. And I think that's it. So do y'all any questions?
I do see one in the chat that says, what about low growing ground covers or ornamentals for shaded spots? I mean, peperomia is really one of the better ones for shady areas.
Ravinia too, Rougeberry.
Yes, that's a good one too.
It's not, yeah, not so much a ground cover, but a low growing shade tolerant with nice red berries, white flowers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Shady areas, as we all know, is one of the toughest parts of the landscape. It also depends on how wet the area is and what kind of things that you might be able to grow there. But
And
there's
kuntis, I've got some kuntis in my yard that are in a pretty shady areas, and they do well, and
yeah,
they're low growing.
yeah. There's a Bahama coffee stays pretty compact and can take a fair amount of shade.
Mhm.
It depends on how big and what kind of like how tall your ground cover you'd be allowing it to get. Oh gosh, sun-loving ground cover. Oh,
Oh,
that's that's there's a lot. Sunshine mimosa, frog fruit.
oh,
Um,
oh, so,
there's
beach dune sunflower. That'll
beech dune
cover it and get
sunflower.
nice yellow flowers.
There's twin flower.
With
There's
flowers.
brownie savory. There's some salvias, native salvias or sages that can be used as ground covers. If you wanna have a really intense landscape that requires a fair amount of maintenance, you can make it a wildflower. If it's full sun, make it a wildflower garden. To be doing some weeding, but that's a great way to get a lot of pollinators in your landscape.
And some of the native grasses too,
Oh,
Elliott's bloodgrass, purple
yeah,
bloodgrass, I think, mealy grass, sandcord
yeah.
grass.
There's a
Um,
piney wood drop seed. I think we've seen used in the landscape that looks. It's a really cute little grass. Yeah, there's a lot of things for sunny areas for ground covers. But
a native lantana. Yeah, there's a lot. How to design
how
those.
to design that is not part of a nursery. How um,
Not sure what you mean. Do you want to unmute and tell
So
us what you
sorry.
mean by that?
Give me a moment.
Oh,
Since I've just jumped in, it sounds like the presentation is you're assuming that the presentation is to professionals in the industry. I am not, and I'm trying to find someone to help me design a wildlife supporting garden that is not necessarily aligned with a nursery. And so up on the chat, how do I find someone like that? I'm in Delray Beach 10B. Where do
um, contact so the local Palm Beach County Native Plant Society chapter. Um, if you reach out to them, but also I email if you want to send me an email, we have a document that has local smaller nurseries that are native nurseries, and some of those nurseries um, also do design or we also have some folks on that do both that grow the native plants as well as do some native plant design, but also connecting with the Native Plant Society here because there's several folks that they don't really advertise or have an internet presence that do landscape design for predominantly native plants.
Got it. And I just would add that I've already bought from three different native nurseries. And in
Mm-hmm.
my experience, they propose the product that they have to sell. And I've had installations done where I've had to come back years later and rip it all out because it's not the right plant for that space. They're beautiful plants, but if I have a native plant that flowers and berries, and in order to walk past it, it has to be hedged regularly,
Mm-hmm.
then I lose the benefit of having a native
Right.
plant. And so I'm reluctant now to work with the nurseries because haven't had good experience in that regard. I mean, I'm putting things in, there's no room for them, and all of a sudden I turn around 3 times and I've got this big tree, and there's no room for the tree. It's up against my house, that kind of thing. Um,
Mm.
I am, so anyway, I'm familiar with the Native Plant Society. I've been to a number of their meetings, and I will go to one and see if they can give me some more names. The ones I've contacted have not available. So, but that's been a while. It's been probably 5, 10 years. So I'll try it again.
Okay.
And
Thank
yeah,
you.
and
Yeah, and also, I mean, my email's on the screen, so send me an
I got
email and
it.
I'll send you the document we have, and um, perhaps we can find a solution.
That would be great. And then one last thing is I need to cross-reference whatever I plant with my iguana population.
Oh, oh, iguanas.
So
Um,
I don't want to basically plant their supper. And that's a whole
yeah,
nother project.
yes, there is not a good solution for that.
and I just wanted to go back to I'm sorry, I don't have any more to add on the iguanas, but the native nurseries, it's okay to bring a book with you, a small handheld reference book. There are a number to pick from that, I've done that before, or look up on my phone, to see, oh, okay, I see this pretty plant here. How does it grow? And look up more information on your phone, um, and it gives you that way you can make your own choices, or you can ask the nursery and kind of have two sources of information. um, so,
Agreed, agreed. But in one instance, they visited my home, and then they went back and pulled a plan together, and then I bought the plants that they suggested, and I've had to pull them out. So that's where I say, nursery owners, I'm a little dubious, because they want to, they're motivated to sell what they grow. And if they don't have anything that fits my need, then what do? They're not going to say, "Well, sorry, I can't help you." So that's been my experience. I'm sure other people have had much better, but it's frustrating.
well, thank you for sharing that, and that's good for all of us to be aware of, as including the professionals on the call, that we I've done that before. I've worked in a nursery, and I just love a plant and I forget necessarily to share the maintenance of it, because no matter the plant, it is going to require maintenance. And so the person buying the plant needs to know that and be prepared and decide yay or nay based on not just how it looks at that time, but what maintenance it'll require. So thank you
Yeah,
for bringing that up.
thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to this platform.
Okay, and we're a little bit past 1, so I don't know how these usually go, but it's, I guess what we could say is, if you want to stay on and ask more questions, we'll hang around. But if you need to go, we're at the 1 o'clock, and so we want to thank you for your time and participation today.
And John, I guess, will there be a recording or a copy of our presentation that goes out to everyone who's registered and or came to the webinar?
Up with everybody that registered. I've got your email contacts. I'll go ahead and put this up on a YouTube, our YouTube channel, and then we'll share the recording with everybody that attended. And I guess the other housekeeping item is CEUs. I'll go ahead and try and put those through as well with the next couple days. And if I've got any questions regarding that, I might follow up with you. Occasionally, there's folks that didn't give me their license numbers or something, and I really need that if I am going to process your CEUs. But yeah, outside of that, if you got more questions, I think we've got time to hang out. Everybody else is free to go. And it's like we
John,
definitely enjoy plant talk. I mean,
Mhm.
so if you
hey
feel free
John,
to unmute yourself or put a question in the chat.
can you guys hear me? Hi, this is
Yes.
Lisa. John, regarding CEUs, I would like CEUs for both LIAF and ISA. And when I registered, I wasn't able to ask for both, but when came on today, I was able to put both of those certification numbers in there. Is that the best way of doing it, or should I email those to you separately?
Yeah, let me take a look at it, and like if I've got questions, I'll follow up with you here.
Okay. And ladies, the presentation was good, but I was really I'm looking for the impossible solution too. I've got at my office, I've got two landscape beds that are about 5 feet wide by maybe 30 feet long, and I've got them lined with Simpson stopper as a hedge behind. So I've got maybe 2 feet of space in which I can plant something in the front. The stoppers are a little leggy. They're maybe 3 feet tall, and we keep trimming them, unfortunately. But I wanted to use natives in this bed, and I want to attract butterflies. I've got sable palms all over the site. I've got firebush all over the site. Um, uh, I've got a bunch of natives on the site. So, but I need something that's low growing that can take the fact that there's really very little direct sun and these beds are kind of wet. So I was looking at peperomia and I noticed that, yeah, of course, the availability of these plants are all in S1 or S3. Nobody in S2 seems to have them. So, um, and that's where I'm located. But, you know, uh, and I see Ravinia growing wild in certain places, but I don't think that's not going to stay neat enough for my boss. He wants it to be neat and tidy. He wants it, he's more of a formal kind of tended thing, so I get away with the hedge, but something for the front, I'm not really sure.
One of the grasses,
Are there any grasses that won't grow taller than my Simpson stopper hedge?
yeah, I mean, it depends on how low you're keeping the stopper trimmed, but
It's
most of,
about 3 feet tall.
oh, I mean, yeah, I mean, the love grasses are lower growing. I know I've grown mine in the full sun. I'm not sure if the area you're talking about would be too shady. I'm not sure how well they do in darker, in the
It's
shade.
bright, but it's not full sun. It's like,
Oh,
very little full sun.
well,
So,
read up on
LA
grass and
okay.
see what
All
you
right.
think.
Yep. I will do it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And like Kara was saying, I don't know where you're at, but feel free to reach out to your local extension office, whatever county you're in.
Yeah.
You can.
I have a good relationship with Mike Orfanides and Donna Castro. So yeah, I talk to them all the time. But this is a particular issue. I don't know. Even my landscapers kind of throw their hands up because what I want to put there is really it's sort of like what I don't know who was saying it before, but I'm planting stuff in the wrong spot. I keep
Mm.
trying different plants there. I was really pleased. I planted porterweed, and unfortunately it wasn't native. But the porterweed had attracted hummingbirds to this site, and and right there in front of the office. But anyway, thank you very much for your time. I appreciated it.
Is swamp twinflower, can that handle, how much shade can swamp twinflower handle?
I don't know, Kara. I've got twin flower in a full sun location. I don't know what
Yeah.
shade it will tolerate.
Because
You know,
if it's wet, because that's being shady and wet, those are having those two things, that really limits limits a lot of the plants.
Handle a little bit of shade, but like deep shade, I don't think it can do that.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't call this deep shade, and I did talk to the gentleman. I spoke to a gentleman at a Fort Lauderdale nursery, and his name is escaping me, but he's got twin flowers. So maybe that's my sign from God that I should try that.
Yeah.
I'll try
Yeah,
it.
because there's the if especially again if it's wet to use the swamp twinflower, because there is the oblong twinflower that wants more dry conditions, but
Right.
yeah, that's try it. Do a little
Okay.
test spot.
I will. I'll do it. I'll try it. I've tested a lot of things in that space that didn't absolutely work over time, but that's what a garden is about. You plant something and then you do something else later on. Thanks to
Yes.
everybody. Take off. I appreciate the time. I really do.
Thank you for coming.
Any other questions?
Okay. Well, I think that's.
Go ahead, Karen,
Oh, is there another?
in the chat. I saw Wendy, she was asking next time include the growing zones, and she mentions Native Plant Society tours, becoming a member of Native Plant Society and going on a tour to see some of these plants and many others in the landscape. That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I guess it seems like a good point to wrap up here. But somebody mentioned in the chat, like, look, even more details for some of the plants that were covered, and I kind of want to, for those that are still around, bring a little bit of attention to something we've got in the works. So Yvette and I have been working quite a bit on a PowerPoint series and presentation series that we're going to try and record and have available like within the next year. We're we're pretty far along in terms of having all the slides developed. It's just a matter of like putting the finishing touches on and then going and recording it and turning into something that can be used as like an on-demand resource. So um so yeah, we'll go ahead and try and bring that all to your attention here once that is able to be distributed. So and it's going to be it's a really heavy on the visual side as well. We tried to go through and get a lot of photos from that were from Creative Commons and iNaturalist and stuff like that. So it should be like a uh pretty cool in my opinion like take on a lot of these natives that just aren't used and give you all an idea of what they actually look like, even though a lot of them are kind of from natural areas. So any other um any, Kara, Yvette? Well, thank you for presenting here, end of the year, like powering through. And uh yeah, I look forward to following up here with anybody as well. If you got questions, please reach out to any of us. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Take care.
Thank you.